a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and a geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, presented by Black Stag Brewing, now in the liquor store near you. I'm John Bonos of Twins Daily. Across the table for me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
We are fresh off the home opener, which the first inning couldn't have been better, John.
I don't know if I'm that fresh, but yeah.
No. Well, what did I text this morning? Are you alive?
Are you alive?
And he said, yeah.
Yeah. He said, yeah.
It's like, okay.
Yes, I am.
I said, you still want to record at 9 a.m.? And he said, yes,
Absolutely.
let's.
Yes, let's.
Which was an odd way to reply. I don't know why.
It's because I only get limited options on my watch.
Okay.
Yeah. I was limited by I didn't actually text that.
Yeah, we had, as usual, very different opening day, very different ballpark experiences. John led a cast of thousands around the ballpark drinking, including my beloved girlfriend, who, by the way, texted me last night at 8:30, which you guys must be on like your 9th location at that point. And all she said, I hadn't texted her for a few hours since I left the ballpark. I just texted her. I was like going home. She said, John is being very sassy towards me. That was it. I didn't reply. I was like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I'm going to guess you deserved it. Probably.
Yeah, she deserves all the sass. Yeah. There's no question about that.
So that was John's experience.
Yeah.
Dan Hayes, next to me in the press box, he has new binoculars for this season that he was very proud of.
Okay.
He spent the majority of the game trying to find John as if you were Where's Waldo, and
I forgot the shirt. Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah, right. You needed the red and white.
Yeah, that's right. Red and white shirt.
Multiple times I said to him, he's like scanning the park. He's like looking up in the sky. He's like focusing on the batters. But I'm like, he's probably in Great Duck, right?
Yeah, that's right. I don't think we ever left Great Duck. Now, I wasn't on the rail in Great Duck. We were kind of back by the bar. So,
yeah, but I know my customer.
Yeah,
I know my Johnny boy where he goes. It's either center field or Great Duck or something. So yeah. Dan was looking out for you. It was a great first inning.
It was a great first inning.
Actually, the weather was less bad than I expected it to be.
I was downright warm at
the start.
The start of the game when the sun was shining on us. Yeah,
I wasn't gonna go stand out on the. If you have a media pass, you can go stand out on the field like for batting practice, or you can sit in the dugout, which I more often do because I like to sit. And I left my jacket upstairs, so I was like, "Oh, I don't want to go out." And it was actually like very pleasant. So you can't even really use the cold as an excuse for them going 0 for after the first inning, basically. But it was very strange because Joe Ryan looked phenomenal in the first inning.
Yes, he did.
He struck out 3 All-Stars, Altuve, Paredes, and Yordan Alvarez, who's the scariest guy ever, and averaged like 94.5 with his fastball, got up to 95.8 or whatever it was. And then pretty much every subsequent inning, he lost like a mile or 2 per hour. And by the end, he had a couple fastballs that were below 90. And we asked him after the game, like, what's up? And he because he missed the last 6 weeks of last year.
Right.
And he had a little bit of a weird spring training, just a little behind or doing some backfield work and stuff like that. But he had a good first start. That's the weird part, against the Cardinals in St. Louis. And he basically said, I didn't feel fatigued. I just feel like I need to get back in like the rhythm of it, like pitching an inning, sitting, going. But he said I didn't feel too worried about it, but add him to the pile of things that'll be worth watching next time out. Yep. And then the same thing, they score a couple of runs. They play some small ball, actually. Yeah. I mean, Wallner almost hit a homer to lead it off. But after that, they scratch out 2 runs.
Buxton with the stolen base.
Yeah, hit a couple infield singles. Yep. They get 2 runs off a really good pitcher in Hunter Brown, a number 1 caliber starter, an all-star caliber starter. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, okay, this can be a fun opener. And then Ryan gives up back-to-back homers in the second inning. We've seen that before. I mean, his Achilles heel, when he struggles, it's almost always home runs because he's a fly ball pitcher. But then the 4th inning, where he gave up 2 more runs, was just a weird, messy. It started, he hit a batter.
Yeah.
Then he balks 2 guys up a base, 2nd and 3rd. And if he hadn't balked, they don't play the infield in. Yep. Rogers what was a 2-run single to score both those runs or both those runners probably is an inning double play, and it's 2-2 at that point. But then they mounted no offense after that. They went, I think 15 of the last 16 were set down by Brown, and then the bullpen came in and threw 3 shutout, I think no hit innings. Yeah. It's look at
the Buxton one a hit? No, that's probably an error.
No,
yeah.
That was
or no, I'm sorry, Wallner, that was an error. That was an error, right?
On the pitcher, I think. Yeah. So you look. I mean, there's not a lot. We're recording this on Friday morning, off day. They're 2-5. They haven't beaten a team yet that's not the White Sox, which we talked about this a lot last year when they went 12-1 against the White Sox. Like, you need to beat the White Sox. And so beating the White Sox, they took 2 out of 3, or last year took 12 out of 13.
Right.
You shouldn't criticize a team for beating the White Sox, but it also doesn't really pad your resume much. It's just sort of like you either took care of business or you should get criticized for losing to them. They're not in that spot, but they're 0-4 against non-White Sox opponents, and it's been largely similar stories here. Not only, the starting rotation has struggled for the most part.
Yeah, that's been the unforeseen problem, right? But
the lineup, I mean, it reminds me so much of last April.
August to September.
Well, that too, but I'm saying when it was cold. Yeah. How I looked up the numbers actually. Last year through 20 games, they're only 7 games in now, but through 20 games last year, they had a 7-13 record. They dug themselves a hole. Yeah. They hit 190 through the first 20 games. I remember, Carlos Santana was hitting 110 and all this stuff.
Right, yeah.
They recovered after that to finish okay in offense, obviously, but it reminds me of that because here are their numbers through 7 games offensively. 180 batting average, 240 on base percentage, a 294 slugging percentage, which equals a 534 OPS, which is the worst in the American League and second worst in all of baseball. The pitching staff also has a 534 ERA, which is second worst in the American League. Only the A's are worse. The pitchers have given up 12 homers in 59 innings. I mean, that's been the issue, honestly. And there's been a bunch of multi-run homers in there, not from Ryan yesterday, but just in general. And then the weird part is 2 balks. One from Lopez early in opening day, and one from Ryan yesterday. I looked it up. They only had 5 balks as a pitching staff all last season.
Yeah.
Not only do they have 2 balks so far, but every runner involved came around to score. 2 for Lopez and 2 for Ryan. Right. And it had a big impact on both games. And that's just not something you see. And the Lopez one, it wasn't clear to me that it was a balk. I mean, I will say this.
There was a lot of discussion about whether or not it was really a balk, right?
You and I have watched a lot of baseball.
Yeah.
Twins and otherwise. 90% of the time, a balk is called. I'm like, okay, fine.
Yeah, right.
But the Ryan one yesterday, he short-circuited, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
And so afterward, what he said about that was that he was Jeffers, right? Yeah, Jeffers was catching. And he said, we were cycling through signs because we just hadn't gotten to the pitch I wanted to throw, which is interesting because he really only throws 3 pitches, but okay. And he said, then I noticed we finally got the sign, whatever the pitch was. We weren't on the same page. And I noticed, oh, crap, there's 1 second left on the pitch clock.
Right.
And I forget what the count was, but he didn't want to give up the automatic ball and get called for a violation. So what you can do in that spot is disengage from the mound. You don't even really have to throw over. You just step off the mound, and that counts for your 1 per plate appearance disengagement.
Right.
Except he freaked out while doing that, and his 1 foot moved before the other one, and he kind of hopped off the mound. And the umpire was just like, "Well, that's even I was like, "That's something, right? Like what?" And he started to argue, and then he didn't argue, and then from there, both guys are in scoring position.
Right.
Brendan Rodgers hits what would be a double play past Correa, and then 4-2, and that was it. It's just such a weird but I hesitate to. And I don't think the Twins, like Baldelli and the players, haven't really used excuses on this front, but it's so natural. And we saw it last year when they started so slow, where it's like, the weather's bad, or we're facing good pitching, or we've been unlucky.
We asked Baldelli about it in spring training, and he talked a little bit about that's been a problem for us hitting in the cold weather.
Right. To me, and have they had some hard hit balls caught? Sure. I mean, Correa's hit some balls hard that he shouldn't be hitting 80. He might be hitting 180. But the reality is that's not really that true, in my opinion. Right. They haven't faced phenomenal pitching. They've made some mediocre pitchers look phenomenal. Yeah. Hunter Brown's a really good pitcher, but think about, they faced Sonny Gray and Eric Fetty in St. Louis. But these are not, elite level pitching game after game. They're hitting 180 against these guys. It's the same story as last year. Have they hit some hard hit balls that, been well struck that if you hit 100 of them, they're going to be a hit more often than not? Yeah. But I don't think they've been that unlucky, really. The weather, I'm over the weather. Guess what? You're a team in Minnesota. Right. Who cares? Right. And Joe Ryan even said, somebody suggested maybe the weather had to do with my velocity fluctuating, but I don't buy into that. And I wanted to clap in the back of the room, good. Yeah. Because what does that do for you? You're going to be playing games, and your opponent, by the way, is playing in the same weather. Right. The Houston Astros, in fact, pregame, talking to a couple of their beat writers who were in town, including the great Chandler Rome, who's the athletic beat writer, one of my favorite people on the beat.
I met Chandler last night.
I bet you did. Yeah. He's fun.
Yeah, he was nice.
He showed us a good time in Houston when I was at the playoff game. I always like that. They had played all 7 previous games indoors. It was 72 degrees, and they were hitting coming into the game even worse than the Twins. They had more extra base hits yesterday than they had in their first 6 or 7 games combined.
They were as cold an offense as the Twins are, and they're also a hot weather team coming to play in the cold. Right. So
yeah. I mean, I'm not saying these excuses. Some of them. First of all, I'm not saying the Twins are overwhelmingly making them. It's things that get mentioned. I'm over it at this point. How many years in a row can you talk about a poor April, or how many years in a row can you talk about all this stuff? So it's frustrating.
The bigger concern to me is not. Yeah, they're making some weird mistakes, etc. The bigger concern to me is it just looks like this offense is stuck where it was last year.
And I feel as if this goes on longer and longer, and it's only 7 games, whatever. But they've scored 3 runs or fewer in 5 of the 7 games.
Well, and the concern this year about this team was the lineup. And
thing is down. Just bigger picture, what you're saying, I agree with. It's like at some point, if this continues and they're not hitting and, they're just – it looks a lot like last April when everyone was obsessed with how cold it was and all that. But it really looks also a lot like you said, the collapse lineup where they just no one hit. They all just kind of shut down at the same time. And, at some point, I don't know why you would be surprised necessarily that a lineup that was horrible the last 2 months last season and really only made 1 change, and it wasn't an upgrade necessarily, is now it's the same group. I mean, the hope had been you bring in new hitting coaches, all the obsessive talk during spring training of we're changing how we're doing things and all that. But as as I'm always known to buzzkill stuff, while it was going on during spring training, I said, why are we assuming this is going to work just because it's different? Yeah. And it sure as hell doesn't look different. And the results have not been different. Now, again, 7 games, the sky's not falling. There's 155 of them left. Today's an off day, and they'll be back out there on Saturday. But
we're going to see if Ober's velocity is a problem.
That's right.
That's the other thing is, like we said, we've got a rotation that I've just got enough questions about enough players suddenly in the middle of this rotation. I thought the biggest takeaway from yesterday wasn't, they had a balk or they're not hitting, etc. like that. Those I know. The velocity thing for Ryan worried me.
Yeah, although he has done that in the past. He's probably, I would say, the most prone to that in game. Yeah, where he'll flash 95 and then be 92, and I don't know why that is. It's just mechanically, I guess, something. But I mean, he's been asked about that. It just. Given it's similar to the collapse, and now if you were just struggling for 7 games, we wouldn't be offensively. Let's say,
sure,
we wouldn't be having the same type of oh no conversation if it wasn't on the heels of the collapse. Right. Same thing with Ryan. If he had a good first start in St. Louis, and I'm not saying he was horrible yesterday. I mean, the balk did him bad, and whatever. Yeah, him giving up a couple of solo homers is kind of how things go with him a lot of the time. And normally, he is a guy whose velocity will fluctuate. He has a very wide spectrum of velocity. Like there are some guys who are just sort of a very tight window, 94 to 96. He's 90 to 96. So that's not super uncommon, but because he missed the final 6 weeks of last season with an arm injury, a shoulder injury, and had kind of an odd spring training just from a workload standpoint, well, there is some context to it that makes it more than just one bad start or more than 7 bad games for a lineup and all that. And unfortunately, because of how the Twins finished and some of their individual players finished either injured or struggling, it magnifies or at least turns things that might not be a red flag on their own, like on an island, into more.
Well, it plays into a narrative that we already had.
It's established. It's a very easy dots to connect and be like, well, they're not hitting. Well, they finished last year not hitting. Or Ryan's velocity seems weird. Is he healthy? Or what is the...
All that said, they are a half game out of first place.
Yeah.
Aaron.
Fortunately for them, they have Central stakes. There was a 5-way tie yesterday for first place at 2-4 and last place at 2-4. The Twins were the only Central team that played yesterday and lost. So now they're in last place at 2-5, a half game out. I mean, that's the nice thing. The beauty of the Central, and even last year, which was one of the Central's best years in a long time.
Right.
The beauty is, like, you don't have to sprint out of the gates. You can just treat even short distances like a marathon because nobody's going to lap you. Like, there's not rarely.
I mean, last year they did, right? Last year Cleveland got out of the gates really fast, built up an 8-game lead or something early on in April.
Although by mid-August, it was somewhat of a race.
Down to 2 or 3 games.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So that's kind of that's what I'm saying. Now the Twins dropped the ball and whatever. But so, and the other thing, do they miss Royce Lewis? Absolutely. But, I don't know that you can look at what's going on so far and really blame it on injuries because they really have 3 guys injured.
Yes.
All due respect to like Michael Tonkin and, he wasn't going to have a big impact on these first 7 games. Right. And it's not like they're short on bullpen arms. Like that hasn't been the cause of this, basically. They're down Royce Lewis, which he's one of their best players, except, last time we saw him in the regular season, he was one of their worst players. So who knows? Right. They're down Brooks Lee, but again, it's not like Brooks Lee had a great rookie season anyway. Like there were questions about him anyway.
Right.
And they're down Brock Stewart. Now that hurts too, but they haven't blown leads, which Brock Stewart's impact would have been protecting late leads. They just haven't had late leads, basically. And if you look at the relievers and how often they've been used, their best relievers have been used the least. Like Jackson Duran have only pitched twice.
Right.
Some other guys have pitched 3 or 4 times. Varland's pitched 4 times. I'm not saying he's their worst reliever, but he's clearly like not elevated into that class yet. So, might they have another win with Lewis, Lee, and Stewart? Yeah, maybe. But it strikes me that like that's not even really. That's another one that I don't buy that as an excuse.
Well, and I mean the result of those lineup things that are going on there, or the lineup injuries, is that we're seeing a lot of Harrison Bader in left field, which is probably, or Harrison Bader in the lineup, I think is part of the effect of all that. Well, he's been one, that's been a good thing. We didn't expect it to be a good thing.
Here's a stat for y'all. Harrison Bader has 3 homers. They're all against righties, which is the weird part. He has 3 home runs. The rest of the team has 2 home runs. Not great. Great for Harrison Bader, who I chatted with briefly. He's very energetic, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a very interesting energy. Like he's just, I don't know. I'll be curious how he is like on a day-to-day for 6 months basis. Because I get tired looking at him, but also I get tired waking up in the morning. So some people are just built. John's got a little of that. He's got a little of that where it's just like,
a little bounciness.
Doing stuff energizes him to do more stuff where I'm like, I don't get it, man. Anyway, the last thing was, before we get to some actual analysis, I guess, we spent a lot of the offseason talking about the ownership crap and the television crap and the lack of moves, the lack of trades, lack of signs, the payroll crap. A lot of not fun topics. And, are they really going to run back this roster just as it was, basically, which they did, and now we're getting this result. But one of the things we talked about was, the poll ads are going to be a storyline, the lack of moves are a storyline, the front office, the coaching staff, the players struggling down the stretch. All this is a storyline right up until the point they win. Right. And if they
Yeah, so
win,
then none
if
of
they
it
were
matters.
5-2 right now, let's say,
Yep.
and look, it's still just 7 games, but no one would be talking about this stuff. But they're not winning. And so, like we said, when that matches kind of the preconceived narrative, and I also feel like narrative, we use that word a lot on the show. It's often like pejorative, like it's often like a criticism, like, oh, that narrative, like it's
Right,
wrong.
yeah, right.
Well, sometimes narratives are narratives for a
Narratives
reason.
are explanations, right?
Right.
They're a frame around the reality.
And so, yeah,
Right.
we did spend quite a bit of the offseason being like, there's no reason this team can't win, especially within the AL Central, which is a weak division. There was no standout team.
Right.
And I think the AL as a whole struck us as like somewhat wide open, or at least not 100-win teams
Right.
present.
We saw that in the over-unders.
Yeah. But you got to just win, baby. You can't stumble out of the gates at 2-5.
Right.
Whatever support there was, whatever, and it, I'm not blaming the fans for a damn thing. The Twins are getting what they deserve in terms of fan support and all that. But they put a real hard press on selling tickets to opening day.
Sure.
They opened it up for Twins Pass, which means you could get in for $4, which they haven't previously done.
Right.
And I got emails. I'm on some list, which is hilarious to me. They're trying to sell me tickets. Like, boy, barking up the wrong tree. But on multiple fronts, they were selling tickets for like $7, $8 or whatever. Still couldn't sell out opening day. And you saw more square footage of the ballpark than I did. I'd say 2/3 full, maybe. Something like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe 3/4.
Yeah.
Maybe 4/5. Whatever. It's like 70, 80.
and this is in no way a criticism of the fans. They're lucky to be 3/4 or 2/3 full, given how they've played so far, given how the offseason went, given the overall vibes. But when you're not selling out opening day, even though you're basically letting people in for free,
right.
I think that speaks more than anything. And I'm going to be very curious what the Saturday, Sunday, because this is only a 3-game homestand, which is kind of odd.
Right.
What the Saturday and Sunday, because that's always much more telling. Second and third game.
Second and third day are much different than the
much
first
more
game.
kind of normal,
That's
business
right.
as usual.
That's right.
And
they're usually probably some of the lowest attended games of the year. The second and third day.
Is that
are
right?
often- I think that's generally true.
yeah, although the Astros are sort of a good draw.
Yeah.
They have been. It's always funny to me that people boo Altuve. The double play partner of Correa.
Right,
like,
exactly.
what are we booing? It was amazing. I don't know if you realize
Yeah.
what you were watching.
5 strikeouts.
0 for 5 with 5
Yeah,
strikeouts for one of the great contact hitters in modern history,
Right.
a career 3 whatever hitter. First time in his career, obviously. It's only the 3rd time in Twins history that a guy has gone 0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts. It's a hilarious
really?
trio. I looked this up at the end of the game. The trio is 2 first ballot Hall of Famers, Altuve, who will be a first ballot Hall of Famer, and Reggie Jackson,
Okay.
and then John Hicks, backup catcher for the Tigers 6 years ago.
No.
I love lists like that where it's like, okay, Altuve, that's weird. Reggie Jackson struck out a lot. And the third string catcher for the 2019 Tigers.
I'm sure John Hicks is like telling his grandkids, I belong in some elite company.
I do wonder, like, if you're John Hicks and you're starting like once every 2 weeks and you're 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts, does it occur to you like, 0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts gets me on a list for the rest of my life? You know? Or my brain is bad to think like that. Before we get to some news and notes and other stuff, let's talk about our first sponsors.
Our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing.
Yeah.
Where we had a party. We had a
That's
opening
right.
day party just, a week ago?
You and 200 of your closest friends.
200 plus closest friends. And it was great. I mean, it's a great, first of all, that's a great location.
Yeah. It's like
and a great
94 and
tap room.
280.
Yep.
Good space, big space. I saw a lot of good pictures from it. Becky enjoyed it.
But also, I mean, the nice thing about the tap room is they have a wider variety of beers than they have in distribution, right? So all of their hazies were available there. They have so many good hazy beers. Final Fantasy IV, I think, was the one that I
that name.
really, really liked. But
Also, they're getting distributed in liquor stores.
That is
And
correct,
That's
yeah.
the big change for them. And that's what we're alerting everyone to, which is they are getting wider and wider distribution. And odds are, whatever your go-to liquor store is, they're either already available there
Right.
Or if you say, hey, you guys should get Black Stack, it's going to be available.
That's exactly right. I mean, it used to be that you could only kind of get them at sort of the specialty beer stores or something like that, but now you can find I'll just recommend Local 755 New England IPA. If you're into IPAs, you're going to love that. We hear from people in social media like, hey, thanks for recommending Black Stack Brewing. This is my new summer beer. So anyway, check out, so stop by Black Stack Brewing. It's near 94 and 280, or even easier, ask them for them at your local liquor store and check out some of their.
Our second sponsor, we just did a sponsor that is a brewery. Now we're doing a sponsor that wants to reach out and talk directly to people who work at bars and breweries.
That's right.
If they're looking to bring people into those businesses, there's a new option for hosting amazing bar trivia. It's called No Frills Trivia.
Yes.
And it's no frills. Just fun to play, pub quiz, a secret theme, creates repeat customers.
Right.
You don't have to play on your smartphones. It gets people interacting instead of just sitting there. And you don't have to worry about cheating.
That's right, yeah. And the best part of it is that it's no frills because it's affordable, right? You can just host it yourself. You don't have to bring somebody else from another organization into your bar and set up all their stuff and set up all. No. For just $20 a week, you get a new themed set of questions and answers delivered to your inbox every week. So all the tools you need to host a successful, profitable trivia night, you just get that sent to you in your inbox for $20 a week.
And we can attest to the work that the man behind this, Andrew, he's a listener, and also we've attended one of his trivia events that Do Young Park hosted.
That is correct.
A year ago or 2 years ago.
At Ladonia.
It was a great time.
Yes.
And we've also been to his old brewery, and he treated us
like
kings there. We had a really good time.
Yeah. Anyway, so if you're a bar event organizer, they also do custom trivia for events or parties. So if you have, if you're doing a special event for your business or something like that, they can take care of you there too. It's a really simple name to remember. It's No Frills Trivia. So you go to check out nofrillstrivia.com to learn more. So if you want to add a unique and fun game to your next event or party, check out nofrillstrivia.com.
Okay. We tried to get, because Royce Lewis wasn't on the road trip, obviously, because he's rehabbing.
Right.
Brooks Lee and Brock Stewart, and I think Tonkin, aren't even in Minnesota. They're still in Fort Myers because they're dealing with their injuries. But we tried to get an update from Lewis or from Falvey or from the trainer, Nick Paparesta, on Lewis's status. Didn't receive it. We're hoping to get one Saturday, Sunday. Yeah. So once we get that, and hopefully get an update on Stewart and Lee and Tonkin and various other injured guys, even some minor league guys I want some updates on, we'll have that hopefully for the Patreon crew, our beloved Patreon subscribers, Monday morning, first thing Monday morning, and we'll recap the whole Astros series at that point.
Correct.
We shouldn't. I mean, the Patreon is shifted from per episode to monthly. So it's $8 a month. And so you're going to get more than 8 episodes.
Right.
So actually the per episode price has dropped. We're such brilliant businessmen. We've lowered our price.
That's right.
And we're coming up with kind of bonus. Now that it's all in one subscription.
Yes.
And we don't feel like everything has to be $1. John did a special 25-minute video reviewing the new food items at Target Field that he tried.
Yep.
I posted a podcast I did with the Racket, kind of anything we can think of to just add something else to the subscription. So we would love to have you join us. And if you want to update on Lee, Lewis, Stewart, etc., we'll probably have that.
We'll cover the whole
Monday
Astros
morning.
series on Monday morning. We'll probably have a mailbag on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So
multiple commercial-free Patreon exclusive episodes per week.
Long,
Plus, we'll start to have some guests on.
Right.
Patreon.com/Gleeman. Patreon. Patreon.com/Gleeman. So
we don't know anything new about Royce Lewis yet.
No, although it's not going to be a great update if they're avoiding giving it. I don't mean like it's a new injury. It's worse than, but we speculated not based on anything the Twins said, but just based on other guys who had moderate left hamstring strains, including Jorge Polanco in 2023. It tends to center around 6 weeks as like a baseline. Well, it's been 2 or 3 weeks, something like that. So, he was walking around. He looked okay. It wasn't like he was crawling or anything like that. But so we'll see. Hopefully, an update over the weekend. I did think as I was sitting there looking at the crowd and watching them lose and just kind of the malaise of it all. How different it felt not that long ago, October 23, where it was just euphoria. I had the same seat, looking at the same crowd, just a completely different vibe. And I saw like Joe Polad walking around yesterday and all this stuff, and I just thought, well, two things occurred to me. One, this is the Twins. It was the Twins' first home opener without Dave St. Peter as team president since 2003,
right?
22 years ago, whatever it was.
When he started 2003? Okay.
I mean, he had a different job before that, but he was elevated. Yes, right. And I personally hope it's their last opening day out of 41 owned by the Polads. Now, that's not set in stone.
Right, yeah. Definitely
but I would say just from, maybe you've heard different or the same, but from stuff I've heard and talking to a couple people yesterday, I don't know that they're close to a sale, but I think things are at least continuing to move forward on that front. At least if, I'll say this, they got me fooled, at least.
Okay.
And I continue
you think things are still going to keep advancing?
I still think they're going to sell the thing.
Well, I mean, I do too, because I think they are motivated sellers. But we've been talking about that for a year and a half.
So, I don't want to get into too much on that front. I'll leave that to Dan Hayes to do the actual reporting and all that. But
since we last did the free show, did we talk about the $475 million in debt?
425, John.
Oh, 425?
Come on,
$425 million. Well, that was 3 weeks ago.
It could be higher. Yeah, that's right. I didn't pay for media lunch yesterday. I just skipped it, so they didn't get my $16 on that.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean,
I don't know if we talked about that on the free.
That's an example of stuff. If you want deeper dives on that, go.
That's right.
Set up a Patreon and get on it. Give it a try for a month. You'll like it, even when the Twins are playing bad. I mean, hell, there's somebody asked me this. I did a Reddit AMA the other day, which I'd never done before. I had to create a Reddit account, which may never use, may become addicted. Who knows? And one of the questions was like, "What are you guys going to do on the podcast if the Twins, like, if this doesn't get better, like if they're just bad?"
Right.
And I said, "Oh, brother, you don't know. We started this in 2011.
Yes, the
first 90-loss season, they had 5 in 6 years. It was one of the worst stretches in Twin history is when we started the podcast. We're used to this by now, and I will say this: obviously,
we started in 2011. By 2017, it had gotten bad enough that they were firing everybody.
Right.
2016, I guess.
And by the way, my childhood, my first baseball memories were like 91 winning the World Series. But then if you look at what happened in the 5 to 8 years after that, it was horrible. I mean, it's probably the worst stretch in franchise history. That's when I was a teenager falling in love with baseball. So our brains are already broken. Like it, and
I was 1974 to 1983.
Right, which wasn't much better.
Right.
And obviously we would prefer the Twins to play well. Personally, professionally, whatever. It's just more fun to talk about a winning team.
Sure.
But I don't know that a winning team is necessarily always more interesting to talk about.
Sure.
It's more fun to talk about and more enjoyable, and there are more people interested in talking about them. But I don't know that the topics themselves are any more interesting than a losing team. Now, they're definitely, I'd take a winning team or a losing team over a mediocre team. But losing teams have much different topics, firings, massive changes, trades for prospects, that sort of thing. And
there's a lot of little moves that go on with a losing team to try and gradually watch it get better. I also think that a lot of the interest has to do with which direction it's going. If this team is not who we thought they were, that they are not an 80-plus win team, that the offense just doesn't develop, that none of the players that we thought were going to be sort of, had, all-star ceiling availability to them, 2 years ago, and they just don't continue to develop, it's going to make for a tough year. I mean, it's going to trend down, and it's going to trend down hard.
Well, I think that's I agree. I still, and again, maybe I'm just dumb, naive. I don't think this is a horrible team. They've played horribly through 7 games, and they played horribly for the last 30-something games of last year. So, I mean, the evidence is mounting, unfortunately.
Yes.
But I continue to believe that.
But we thought the same thing by the end of August too. Like, this just isn't that bad a team. This little 2-week stretch that they've had of playing really poorly, and then
at some point,
then end another 4 weeks.
The samples get bigger, and you have to adjust your perception of it, I guess. But
your narrative.
Just your narrative. But I do think that a large part of malaise, like I said, or just the fan morale sinking, and I suspect we're going to start to see that in ticket sales in a real meaningful way. And if we ever find out about the streaming numbers, I suspect they're going to keep those secret. But is what you just said a sense that not only are they playing poorly, but like where does this what do they latch onto as they're falling?
Right.
Like what can stop this and allow them to, and it's becoming tougher and tougher to kind of point to, well, just grab a hold of that and pull yourself back up, because it's like, okay, we thought this was going to be, we thought that was going to be, I thought the starting pitching was going to be a strength this year, all this, the changes that they talked about. And again, it's only 7 games. It's a difficult spot. We talked about this on the last Patreon, so I won't get that far into it, but it's a difficult spot to be, a week and a half into a season that's 6 months long with a team that's played as poorly as they have and all the narrative surrounding it.
Right.
But I don't think it does anybody any favors if we were to sit here and go, they got to blow the whole thing up. They got to fire everyone. This team's headed towards 100 losses, because I don't believe that. And I'm not going to say that just for clicks and, hot takes and all that. And maybe we'll be proven wrong in 2 months from now. We'll say, man, we should have seen this coming. But I just think the talent level on this team is too high. And that's even with, we've spent all offseason kind of talking about some of the guys, like you just mentioned, like have we, or have the Twins even, kind of overstated, even internally, what the true talent level of this is with some of the, especially on the hitting side, I would say.
Exactly right.
With the 20-something-year-old hitters.
Are we worried that, Julian is never going to become Julian, the Julian that we saw in 2023? Are we worried that Miranda's never going to show through the promise that he showed in the middle of last year?
Yeah.
Or, in the minors in 2022.
But even with a lot of those question marks, I don't see this as a truly, terrible team. Now, I'm absolutely, at this point, willing to believe it's a bad team.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what they need to prove otherwise over the next several weeks. Hopefully starting tomorrow. But it's tricky. There's only so much analysis, meaningful analysis, as opposed to just mad or whatever, that you can do about 7 games, good or bad.
Right.
But there's also only so much you can do 7 games in for a team that, I look at it and it's just this is not a 90-loss team. It shouldn't be. And if it is, by the way, this team's going to get people fired.
Oh,
and it should. If this is a 94-loss team or something like that, I don't, given how last year ended, I just punched my microphone out of anger. So mad, I can't take it anymore. Better it than you, John.
Yes.
You're too far across the table. I don't have that great of a reach.
That's why I get the long table. Yeah.
I have a Desmond Bain-esque wingspan. There's a NBA reference for people. He has a very short arm. Okay. But if it does get to that point, and we talked about this at the end of last season, after Falvey's kind of closing statement thing,
right,
where it was you can probably all keep your jobs, and they did, and you can, turns out, not make many meaningful changes during the
back, essentially, right?
But I don't know that you can do that and then have it fall completely flat there not be any consequences.
That's right.
And hopefully longtime listeners of ours know, even going back to the Gardenhire days or whatever, we're not really call for people's jobs type of guy. Sure. I just don't really see the value in that. But by the end of the Gardy era, there were such little historic precedent for a guy keeping his job after 5 90-loss seasons out of 6 years or whatever it was. And that's not the case here because their struggles aren't that extreme yet. But I just think, how can you end last season the way you did, have the basic non-existent offseason that you did, and ownership played a part in that with the payroll limitation. Right. I'm not saying otherwise. And if you fall flat this year, well, who's the scapegoat at that point? Right. I mean,
you already fired the hitting coach.
Right. I mean, at some point, I don't know. And I actually kind of feel like the players have to, and I don't mean fire the players because whatever. What I mean is and maybe they should have come to this conclusion coming off last year. I mean, we spent the first part of the offseason kind of saying, does this core need shaking up?
Right. Do they need to make a big change somewhere?
Right.
In this, right.
And that wouldn't necessarily require a lot of payroll flexibility. Like you can trade a 27-year-old arbitration eligible player for a different 27 or for prospects or for whatever you want. And so, I always point to the players first, good and bad. I mean, you will rarely have heard either of us say, even in like 2019 or whatever, when Baldelli won Manager of the Year, he wouldn't have been in my top 15 things for why they won.
Sure.
And I'm not trying to insult him, but the flip side is also true. like when they're losing, I point to here's honestly how I do it, and maybe you disagree. Good or bad, I always point to the players first. And that might seem simple, but I'm shocked across all sports how often that isn't the case. Like a losing team, it's always about something other than the players winning. I'll always point to the players. Second, I'll always point to the people who chose the players, which is the front office.
Yeah, fair.
And then,
I mean, you can find things that managers screw up.
Absolutely.
Right? And if that's the case, but I'm not seeing a lot of that with Baldelli. What I'm seeing is him trotting out what I think is, about the way I would trot it out, and they're just not performing.
Right.
And interestingly enough, from the front office standpoint, the guys they brought in, like Bader and France, those are the guys who are actually doing something so far this week. Versus
France is hitting 160, but
nobody's been hitting the ball around.
Nobody's doing anything. I mean, the problem is they didn't bring in anyone.
Well,
so France has 3 homers. Bader has 3 homers. I'll give you that. Right. But I mean, the other 2 guys were like a okay first baseman who's hitting 160, and he's again had some hard hit balls, like you said.
Right.
And a lefty middle reliever who's pitched 3 times in inconsequential spots. So it hasn't really meant anything. But I'm not saying give Baldelli a contract extension. I have no problem with people. I mean, he has to take ownership, no pun intended, after the ownership discussion of this team. I mean, this team has now played a third of a season as the worst team in the league. Yeah, I mean that's the reality. But the weird thing is they've played so badly that it almost makes it hard
off the hook.
for the manager to affect things.
Right.
Now, behind the scenes, sure. But when the lineup is hitting 180, including, Carlos Correa at 080 and, go down the line, and the pitching staff has a 5.50 ERA, what strings was he going to pull there? I mean, they haven't had a late lead for him to choose relievers. They had that once, basically. Right. There's been no pinch hitting, really, because they've been down 5 runs right away. And that's frustrating, too, because it's not that fun to just go, they're so bad, there isn't even that much to talk about. Right. Like, in terms of, oh, man, in the 5th inning, they should have done this. And I was like, well, no, they just played like crap. They pitched like crap. They hit like crap.
Yeah,
what can you really... Yeah. What can you really do other than climb out of that hole, hopefully, over the next couple of weeks? Yeah. I mean, we saw it last year. They climbed out of it last year. Unfortunately, then they fell in a different hole in mid-August.
To some extent, the manager is responsible for when this kind of thing happens. People look to the manager to have some sort of mystical ability to provide a rally sausage or something like that. You know what I mean? Like is that I don't know how to objectively evaluate, whether or not he can do anything about that.
But I just think it's true. I think or at least I strive to be pretty consistent even when things are going extremely well for them. I just don't think that the manager has that much pull. And I also think it's just such an easy thing. Fire the coach, fire the manager. Sure. It's like, it's almost always the players. When you're paying a guy $35 million, and he's the face of your team, and Carlos Correa, and he hits 080. What do you think Rocco Baldelli is going to do?
How entertaining was it to watch him throw his arms up in the air around first base on Wednesday afternoon?
He snapped to 0 for 18 with like the cheapest single ever, which is funny because he had a bunch of hard hit balls go for outs, and I think they got the baseball as if it was the first hit of his career, and he threw his hands up and they were celebrating. It was funny. I mean. It's gallows humor, I guess, at some point.
It is a little bit. It's also funny because, if you asked him before, he'd be like, I'm not worried about it, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And then you see him, the relief that he has when that ball squeaks through the infield and he throws his arms up in the air and you're maybe a little worried about it.
It's also, there's so many negatives so far, which is always going to be the case when you start 2-5, but I feel like even within that context, there's so many negatives on and off the field. I tried to put together a list of bright spots.
Sure.
See if you can either agree with these or think of another one, but it's a pretty short list, so I can go over it.
All right.
I ain't going to take the rest of the show. This first, watching Buxton yesterday.
Yeah.
One day after he hit a 450-foot homer, he used his legs to get 2 infield singles and then stole his first base, came around to score.
It is fun to watch him right now.
He ended last season healthy, which was a rarity. Yeah. He had a healthy full offseason, which has been a rarity for him, and he arrived at and exited spring training healthy, which is even another rarity for him. It's just
he started all 7 games
in center field too.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
which is interesting. I'll see. After an off day, he should be in there Saturday too. Harrison Bader hasn't played center field yet.
You're right.
He's been exclusively a corner guy.
That's funny.
And so watching Buxton, talking to Baldelli about Buxton yesterday, he's had, I mean, for the most part, when healthy enough to play, he's been great. I mean, look at his numbers.
Sure.
It's always great numbers in 75 games, or last year 102 games, which was his most since 2017. But he does look actually healthy now, as opposed to just healthy enough to be good when he's on the field. And the way I always look is running, but he's always fast, and he's been fast even when hurt, to the point that we've talked about, like, he'll steal a base. There's been years where he stole a base and it was incredibly fast, and then it took him 30 seconds to pick himself up off the ground. What we've seen now is he's incredibly fast. He's made some good catches in center field. He's run the base as well. He's beat out singles. He stole a base yesterday, like I said. But also, like, he seems able to stop himself while running, as opposed to, like, he's sometimes when he's injured and his hip is hurting or his knee is hurting, he looks like one of those race cars where they put the
parachute
behind it to gradually slow it down. Yep. And now he's making hard stops. He doesn't appear to be in pain. When he slides, he can hop back up. That's different. And, you know, he also then the day before hits a 450-foot homer. I mean, that's the Byron Buxton experience. Unfortunately, injuries have also been the Byron Buxton experience, but he's looked as healthy. And it's not like he's hitting 350. He's off to like a mediocre start overall, but he just looks actually healthy, as opposed to in past years healthy enough to keep playing and still be good.
You're right.
But he actually looks and he talks like a guy who...
It feels different.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. One of my favorite moments from that first inning yesterday was when he got that little bloop infield single, and they pick up the ball.
Yeah, such a strange... had so much backspin on it that it like...
Such a weird thing, right?
Yeah.
And the pitcher picks it up to throw to first base. The camera work on it was fantastic in that by the time the camera followed the ball to first base, Buxton not only had beat it out, he wasn't even in the frame of the picture. I mean, like, you could see 40 feet down the line, and he was already outside of it. He didn't even. It was just fit. I was like, it's like he's disappeared.
Yeah, he was that one. Do Hyung Park, who cannot quit the Twins, posted it was like 31.5 on the sprint speed, which anything above 30 is like considered elite speed even for Buxton. So he was moving.
I loved that camera.
So yeah, everyone seems very excited about that, including Buxton, which, you know, there's not enough wood in the world to knock on for this, but for Patreon listeners heard this, but somebody's going to make us, a woodworker's going to make us a piece of wood, like a designed Gleeman and Geek piece of wood for John to
knock on every time Aaron tries to jinx us.
Yeah. Here's a couple other. Bader hitting the 3 home runs is a bright spot, although like he's hitting like 210, but I'll take it. The 3 homers. Yeah. He has 3 homers all against righties already after 7 in like 300 plate appearances against righties last year. That's been clearly a bright spot. And as you pointed out, some of the negatives, injuries, and, you know, guys like Miranda and Julian not stepping up forward have created an opportunity for Bader, and he's popped 3 homers, including some big
between
spots.
Lewis and Julian and Miranda not really doing anything. There's just, you can take a look at the lineup and go, well, do I want one of these guys who's not really providing much either offensively or defensively, or do I just want the guy who's probably not going to be that good offensively, but at the very least we know he can run around left field and make some plays.
If he gets on, he can run a little there, and then he pops 3
homers. And then he pops 3 home runs on top of it, right? Becomes the
Baldelli
best.
said yes, so I tried to ask Baldelli yesterday, or I forget who asked, but because I was curious, like, is this just an example of a 10-year veteran in Bader who it's not like he hasn't had power, but his numbers against righties, as we've talked about a few times, just aren't that good, to the point that he is someone you would look at the career track record against righties and not want to play him a lot against righties. My question has been kind of like, has he just, put 3 good swings on pitches, including a couple that were just, meatballs, but whatever, you still got to take advantage. Or is there kind of something behind the scenes going on? Did the Twins target him because they thought there was something to fix? Sure. And Baldelli was asked about that yesterday and basically just said, well, Bader's been injured a lot over the last couple of years.
That is true. That is something we probably have not talked about.
So we feel like he's healthy now, and that helps. And Baldelli also basically said, look, this is a guy who's had power before.
Yeah.
Maybe not consistently, but you look at him and he's a guy who looks like he's going to have power.
Yeah, that's true.
And, he's averaged 15 homers per 150 games or something like that, 15, 20 homers over the years. And so would it take that much for him to pop 15, 20 homers? No, if they're going to play him regularly. Sure. But there wasn't like we
targeted him because we saw that he needed to make an adjustment on this type of pitch or blah, blah, blah. And once he did that, we've unlocked something new. Right.
Which that would have been very satisfying to hear that.
Yes.
Like, oh yeah, we thought against righties he was he was taking a stride the wrong direction and we thought this.
But the health narrative is interesting.
Sure.
I mean, that is something that he had a reputation for not being able to stay particularly healthy. And even one of the things that he talked about even in spring training, I think, was like, well, last year at least, I didn't have a great year, but at least I stayed on the field. Like
although he hit like 160 in the second half.
I know. But he also did not do. He also had a hot start last year for the first half, and then faded a lot in the second half. And for a guy who has not been healthy most of his career, it's not too surprising that he gets 3 months into the season and maybe he's running out of gas a little bit in the second half.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
We'll see.
We'll ride it while we can.
By the way, it could be a month from now and he still has 3 homers, and this seems like a topic that we don't even remember. But and then the other, I said it'd be a short list. Bright spots. Willie Castro's hitting okay.
Willie Castro's doing all right. Yep.
This is where we're at. Like a guy who's sort of hitting his career norms. We're like, there's a bright spot.
Right.
There's been 13 position players to step to the plate for the Twins this year. Bader and Castro are the only ones with an OPS of even 700.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
Yes.
And the last bright spot, because I tried to get more than 3, Pablo's looked mostly okay, like from a velocity standpoint and a health standpoint.
Yeah, he looked awesome versus the White Sox, but
but the first start, like he botched it with his own fielding,
right? Yes,
against St. Louis. But the stuff is good, and as I guess I kind of thought about this as I was watching Ryan lose 4 miles an hour during yesterday's game, where at least Lopez has kind of maintained the raw stuff. The strikeouts haven't quite been there, but that's really all I've got for bright spots.
I'll add Varland. I think Varland has looked pretty good, and I like the fact that they're feeling empowered to use him a lot in a lot of situations.
He got hit hard yesterday, and he gave up a homer 2 games ago. But I think the issue with Varland, I do like that they're using him. He's been used. I think he's got a team high 4 appearances in 7 games. Right. It's clear he's being used as a traditional, I would say, secondary setup man, 1 inning at a time, which I like that. I think in time he will succeed in that role. But yesterday was a good example of, well, actually something we talk about with all pitchers, the kind of difference between control and command. And they often get treated as one and the same when people talk about pitching. But to me, we've always tried to kind of differentiate between that. And the way I view it as different is control to me is throwing strikes. Command is where are those strikes? Right. There are tons of pitchers, and the Twins have had many of them, who just pound the strike zone. But they give up a lot of runs because they're throwing the ball down the middle too much, or they're leaving the ball down the middle too much. Whereas like Mariano Rivera, who's the greatest relief pitcher of all time, had okay control, not pinpoint control. His walk rates were not spectacular for a pitcher of his caliber overall, but he had what I would consider the greatest command in modern baseball history. I once saw a presentation about this at a Sabre convention where they took his heat map for all the pitches he had thrown in like his 20-year career. Mm-hmm. And when you put it in...
it looks like a frame.
It looks like a frame. That's exactly right. It looked like a horseshoe, basically, around. It was just everything on what they call the black, everything on the edge of the strike zone, and almost nothing right down the middle. Right. And Varland strikes me as a guy who can definitely throw strikes and doesn't walk a ton of guys, never really has. I'm never concerned like if he walks a couple batter out, he's going to walk 6 guys in this outing. He throws strikes. But his issue, I think, as a starter, and I think we've seen it a little bit as a reliever, you hope moving to the bullpen solves that a little bit, is with command. Because he's throwing 98, 99, which is great. He's throwing strikes, which is great. But like once every 25 pitches, he just leaves one right down the middle of the plate, and it gets
definitely the case for him as a starter for sure. Right.
And he gave up a double off the wall yesterday.
Doubles, yeah.
And that's to me the step that needs to happen for him to go from good reliever to actual guy you want to rely on.
Well, the other thing is that you're allowed to get away with some of those mistakes as well. You know he's got, I think, good enough stuff in the bullpen that if he does make those mistakes, even if he continues to make the same mistakes he made as a starter, he might get away with it because he's out throwing an extra 3 miles per hour faster. Or something.
A meatball, a middle, as we call it, at 98 or 99 versus 93 or 94. At 98 or 99, you might still get a swing and a miss because it just overpowers, or a foul ball, or it pops it up, or grounds it. Right. Whereas meatballs at 92 get hit, 500 feet.
Bleacher, sure.
So yeah, I agree with all that, and I'm still very optimistic about Varland long term as a reliever. But I do think this is an issue from starting that he needs to prove he can get rid of, as opposed to just assuming he can get rid of. That's really all I got for bright spots. The weather yesterday was a bright spot, and it wasn't even that nice. That's where I'm at.
It's supposed to be a little bit of a bright spot on Saturday and Sunday as well.
Before we talk about some other stuff,
let's talk about another bright spot coming up. Mother's Day. Mother's Day is coming up.
Sure.
And we've got a great idea for a gift. Raycon earbuds.
Raycon earbuds. I'll tell you, my mother has a pair of these from a couple years ago. I got her, and she enjoyed it.
Yeah,
she goes on walks. She wants wireless earbuds.
Well, that's because they're just really well engineered.
Yeah.
They're very comfortable. They've got a ridiculous battery life. They're easy to pair with your whatever you've got.
If you wear them, like you guys go on runs with them.
Right.
My mom goes on walks with them. I sit on the couch with them. They feel good, better than other earbuds that you can get.
Right.
The actual fit in your ear, I find to be better.
Yep.
Which, if you're going to wear them for an hour and a half while you're running or whatever, that's a key consideration too.
And mom will be happy that you're not spending too much on her because you don't want you to. You shouldn't have spent that much on me.
Yeah.
Because they're about half the price of some of these other brand name earbuds that are out there. Right?
If you go to, and you can get a 20% off
on top of that,
site-wide.
That's right.
If you go to Buy Raycon, that's BUY, and then Raycon, RAYCON, buyraycon.com/Gleeman gets you 20% off site-wide right now. Raycon offering 20% site-wide when you go to buyraycon.com/Gleeman. That's BUYRAYCON, buyraycon.com/Gleeman.
And then I'll also just, one of the more, I think it's a little bit of a life hack right now, Factor meals. They are just about everything you want in a meal. Like, it's healthy food. It's quick as hell to make. Gets delivered right to you. And they're delicious. You just get a fridge full of them. And you don't have to worry about how you're going to eat or eating bad stuff for you or spending too much on your food.
So many menu items each week that they update that you can choose from. Like if you want a protein, if you want vegetarian, if you want kid-friendly, if you want meat-friendly, keto, they can kind of customize to what you're actually looking to get into. And if you get started at factormeals.com/Gleeman50off and then use the code Gleeman50off, so Gleeman50off, you get 50% off, and they'll give you free shipping on your first box. So that's code Gleeman50off at factormeals.com/Gleeman50off for 50% plus free shipping. All right. I'm not going to list negatives because it's only an hour and a half show. That would be funny. It's like reading the phone book. Okay, we're on page 2 of the Johnson.
Never liked this guy.
I mean, the negative, obviously, nobody's hitting.
Right.
even the guys who are hitting are just, whatever. Right. Correa particular, I do think he's gotten a little unlucky, but it's not as if his expected numbers are that amazing. They're okay.
Sure.
I also just think he looks slow even by the last couple of years standards, which tells me either he's just getting older and 2 years of heel problems have, sapped some of the speed and athleticism, or he's just going out of his way to not put any running effort in.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be slow in the field. He just seems to be slow around the base paths.
But I'm not one of these guys who needs false hustle. If you're Carlos Correa in the fourth inning of a game and you hit a chopper to third base, I don't need you busting ass down the line because of his heel problems. But we saw 2 years ago when he took that same approach to try to stay in the lineup, and he did successfully stay in the lineup. Any ground ball with a guy on base basically turned into a double play for him. And we've seen that a couple times already this year. That's a worry for me. I don't need a guy pretending he's Nick Punto and diving headfirst on routine ground balls and all that stuff. And I get the conservation of health, particularly for a guy who's had leg and foot problems and all that. It's the same deal with Buxton. It's the same deal they did with Josh Donaldson. It's the same deal they're probably going to do with Royce Lewis when he comes back. I'd rather an attempt to stay healthy than an attempt to beat out one infield single a season by, hauling ass down the line. But again, two things can be true. He could also just be slower. I mean, if you look at the year by year from aging, he went from when he was with the Astros pretty fast to pretty quickly being kind of average runner, which is unique among shortstops. I mean, now he's certainly below average runner. So that's something to keep an eye on. I mean, again, if he's hitting 290 instead of 090 right now, nobody cares. Right. But that's something to keep an eye on, I think. You mentioned Miranda a little earlier. To me, his approach just looks, even by his standards, just up there taking strikes and swinging at crap. Yeah. And I did think it was noteworthy yesterday. It was basically the same lineup as opening day.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you would expect, like the opener and the home opener, except they essentially benched Miranda for Julian, and they did that by moving Castro from second.
Now we should mention, on opening day, Julian was, we think, sick.
Yes.
Right? That week, that series for the Cardinals, he was.
But I still don't think he would have started on opening day.
I agree with you.
But it was against a right-handed pitcher both times.
Yep.
So I think that's noteworthy because if you're in a spot, given how the last year or so has gone for Julian, and the fact that I don't think he was going to make the team out of spring training if not for Brooks Lee's injury at the last minute.
Yeah.
Then a week later, you're basically benching Miranda, who not so long ago looked like a building block type of hitter, for Julian on the home opener, which doesn't quite carry the same symbolic nature in terms of making lineup decisions as the opener, but there is a little bit of that sometimes. So I thought that was something to keep an eye on too.
I mean, I think Miranda's in danger of finding some time in St. Paul at this point. That if Lewis ends up returning or Lee ends up being available, I could see that being one of the moves that they make. Although I'm not sure they have that much faith in Brooks Lee at this point to necessarily hit at the major league level either.
It's not like Julian's scalding the ball either.
You're right.
He made one bad play at second, but he's barely played. Like you said, he was sick. Right. But let's see, there was one other. Yeah, we talked about Ryan.
But I wouldn't be shocked if he goes down as opposed to, say, Gasper.
Well, I agree with that because I mean, if Lee and or Lewis are back, you're going to want a couple guys that aren't in need of playing time,
right?
And Gasper certainly is much more, fine with sitting on the bench.
Yeah, right. He fits that role, that bench role, better than
Julian Miranda, or really a lot of these guys that we're talking about. Ober's velocity is worth tracking, although by the time people listen to this, they probably will have played, some of the people. So we can talk about that on Monday's show, too. That'll definitely be a topic.
Yes.
And then the other thing is we're going to see Paddock again here this weekend, Sunday.
Yeah.
And he got bombed in his first. It wasn't a velocity problem. He just got knocked around in his first start. And we go back to the narratives. I mean, that was a narrative all offseason of will they trade Paddock? Will they not trade Paddock? Why are they sticking with him versus turning to one of the young guys in that role? And so not only did Paddock perform so poorly, and that's after, again, It's not just the narrative of this season. It's connecting it to last season, which is he didn't throw a pitch in the second half because of arm problems, coming back from second Tommy John, all that stuff. You know, I don't think he's in a spot where another bad performance would get him booted from the rotation, but his performance, his lack of consistency last year, combined with the fact that the Twins have at minimum 3 good and if not MLB ready, very close to MLB ready pitching prospects at AAA, Festa, Matthews, Andrew Morris, and to add a little intrigue to this, all 3 of them threw 5 shutout innings, exactly 5 shutout innings in their first start of the season. 1, 2, 3. They've combined for 15 shutout innings. So that is definitely going to be a thing to track on both sides of the fence.
Yes, you're
in
right.
St. Paul and in Minneapolis, basically. So that's worth watching. I also tried to think of, like, what have we learned other than, you know, the capacity for the human mind to be depressed? How many people are willing to follow John around Target Field like the Pied Piper?
How many beers can John consume?
Right, yeah. Okay, we learned a lot about that. I've learned so much about that over the years. I guess
we also learned a little bit about the food situation at Target Field. You can also listen to that on the Patreon.
Yeah. We learned John doesn't like pickles.
That's right.
Which I agree with.
Yeah.
That really upset a lot of people. I think people, for some reason, had it in their head that John was going to be a guy who likes pickles.
Well,
and he throws you a curveball.
I am working on it. Just so
this is clear. Like every 6 months, John, I start gossiping about someone, and John goes, "Yeah, that guy does suck." It throws me a curveball, just enough to keep it alive, so that I don't assume it's always going to. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
people think, yeah, of course, John likes everything. No, doesn't like pickles. So we talked about that on the Patreon. There's a sales pitch for you. But what have we learned? Like, good, bad, whatever. Well, I think the Bader thing we've learned, which is they're going to play him in the corners and against righties more than at least I anticipated. You seem to be, well, you talked to Baldelli during spring training. I think got the vibes from him.
Got that vibe, yeah.
I think we learned about Varlin, what we just talked about, which is not only is he in the bullpen, but he's being treated like an actual reliever, which is to say 1 inning, pitching basically every other day, pitching kind of medium leverage situations, which I think makes sense, but it's possible he could have been used in sort of the Dobnik, McGocken? Is that how you say his name?
I don't know.
Darren McGocken.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, sitting next to Dan Hayes as a guy named McGocken was pitching was not a pleasant experience for me. Just the number of failed joke attempts and the whatever. But he looked good yesterday, actually.
Dan?
No, Dan looked horrible. And in fact, Dan did something so funny.
I saw Dan.
Well, you saw. Maybe you looked better with your beer goggles on. Dan did something so funny yesterday that we could have led off this episode with it. So, and I mean embarrassing to him, not just funny.
Sure.
But I'm a nice person, so I'm not going to do that. Okay. It's not nothing like nefarious or like illegal. No. But it's just something so Dan-like that everyone he's told and I've told have immediately rolled their eyes and laughed. And I'm choosing not to. He can self-report if he wants.
Okay.
I want to talk about it so much, but I'm not going to.
Don't you dare.
Anyway. And then the other, I think maybe the biggest thing we learned, we discussed this at length already, but Buxton. Yeah. Just how he looks. And again, this isn't really attached to performance yet. It's not like he's hitting 240. He's got, an okay overall numbers, but he just looks healthy. And I don't mean, we've said this in years past where it's like, oh, he looks okay. But there's always this sense, and look, he might get hurt tomorrow. Who knows? There's that wood we need to knock on again. But I think that's a big deal. And then the other thing is I think the Miranda Julian are on less solid footing.
I think so too.
In part because of each other's presence. Yeah. Like there's an alternative.
Yeah. And you've got enough flexibility that you can put Castro in one of their 2 spots on a regular basis. Yeah.
And that's why I'm very curious to get, hopefully tomorrow, which we'll share Monday on the Patreon, some level of update, not only on Lewis, but on Lee. I guess I'm assuming Lee will be back before Lewis because the injury that they, made public about him was just a sore back, basically. Yeah. Except that's also what it was phrased as last spring, and he ended up missing 3 months with a herniated disc in his back. But again, hopefully we'll have an update on that on Monday. To end on, the Forbes annual report on team finances, I guess I would call it.
Yes.
And these are estimates because like teams other than the Braves and I guess the Blue Jays, teams don't open up their books because they don't have to open up.
And the only reason those two do is because they're publicly traded companies.
Correct.
So they have to.
And funny, the Braves are tremendously profitable. And they have huge revenue streams. That's always why when teams like the Twins claim huge losses and claim we're not making money and stuff, I'm always like, go ahead and open those books up and show it, brother.
Yeah.
But they don't because they're not compelled to do that. But Forbes has, for as long as I can remember, Forbes magazine has attempted to estimate these numbers, and it's not like they're just throwing darts. I mean, it's a business magazine. They have sources. They have sources in the league. They have sources with teams,
and they know enough about the way baseball teams are run, et cetera, to be able to get some estimates and do some back of the napkin kind of figuring. I would say. Yeah.
I mean, it honestly wouldn't surprise me in some cases or most cases if they're just literally getting numbers from teams or the league. But it leaves open the ability for teams to go, I don't trust Forbes. They're way off.
Sure, of course.
It's like, well, how can we prove it? Your books are closed. But I read through their 2024 report, which is published in early 2025, about last season's revenues and spending and all that stuff. And I read through it, and there were a lot of interesting notes about the Twins that are made even more interesting by the fact that they're up for sale. And as Dan Hayes and Ken Rosenthal and Britt Garoli reported last week at The Athletic, 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, the Twins have rejected an offer somewhere in the vicinity of $1.5 billion. Right. Well, that's noteworthy because about 10 days after they reported that, Forbes estimated the Twins' value at precisely $1.5 billion.
Okay.
And so that tells you right off the bat, if those numbers are to be believed, and even if they're off by a little bit in one way, that essentially means the Poads have already turned down a market rate offer. Now, there's two conclusions to draw from that, right? One is, well, they don't really want to sell the team if they're turning down market rate offers. Two, I guess there's three. Two is what Dan and Ken and Britt wrote about, which is they have so much debt on their books, $425 million, that in their mind they can't sell the team for quote unquote only $1.5 billion because once you pay off the $400 million in debt, you're not walking away with enough money to buy your 8th yacht or whatever. The third conclusion, and this is kind of how I'm leaning, is they feel that by rejecting 1.5 and perhaps not shying away from some of this being reported on, they can just get more than 1.5. Well, I mean, that's the Occam's razor of this, right?
Part of what the report was, right? That they knew that some teams have cleared the bar, the 1.5 billion, or not
at least
teams,
one,
some ownership, interested ownership groups have cleared that bar. So
but they want 1.7,
right?
For whatever reasons, and so I mean, look, I don't hold that against them. Anybody who's selling something,
I would like an extra $200 million, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But it's interesting within the context of the Forbes numbers. So a couple other things on the Forbes things. Like we always note, they bought Carl Pohlad, their grandfather, bought the Twins for $44 million in 1984, which is kind of incredible. Forbes estimated, here was where it really got interesting to me. So they estimate revenue per season. So in 2023, when the Twins won the division and broke the playoff losing streak, Forbes estimated that they had baseball revenue of $342 million.
Okay.
Which, that I can do some math on that because we know, for instance, what the national TV contract pays. We know, for instance, what, you can do some back of the napkin stuff on attendance and all that. It seems reasonable to me.
Then also payroll is right. The opening day payroll is what, 160, 150, something like that.
Right. So that's roughly half, which is kind of how, a little bit below half, which is kind of how they do it. Or they did for years.
Right.
Back when Dave St. Peter used to come on the podcast. Somebody told me yesterday, Have you guys invited Dave St. Peter on the podcast?
We
yet?
are working on it.
We'll invite him.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I'll wear a helmet that day, maybe, or something like that. I'll use John as a human shield.
That's it. Yeah, that's right.
No. I'm not afraid of being yelled at. That's fine with me. And actually, after all these years on radio and doing podcasts, I would gladly be whatevered at if it's good radio.
Sure.
That's my life at this point. Anything. You think I tell these embarrassing stories about myself because it makes me feel good? No, I'm hoping to make you guys laugh. Anyway, last year, however, projected revenue, or estimated revenue, excuse me, $324 million, which is $18 million lower. Okay. But again, that also makes sense to me. The on-field product was worse. Sure. Attendance was slightly down. Right. And they didn't have any playoff games.
And the TV contract thing was
true
less as well. Like we don't think they got anywhere near the $54 million they got in 2023.
True. And they didn't host 4 playoff games like they did the year before. However, if that's true and they made $324 million, that's an $18 million drop in revenue, and the payroll dropped more than that.
Yeah,
which is interesting. It also makes me think that given the TV situation now, given what we talked about with fan morale and attendance, which remains to be seen, obviously, it's going to drop further than that. But that's just a cycle. Like, you can use that as an excuse to drop payroll, but then dropping payroll makes the team worse and makes fan morale worse.
Yeah, you're in a negative spiral right now as opposed to a positive spiral.
Here's the other part. Forbes takes and estimates the total player-related expenses, which is payroll, the traditional thing we think of as payroll when we say they had $135 million payroll. Sure. But also there's like pension, there's ancillary costs involved. Sure. There's all sorts of other things, for running a team for 6 months. So in the last 2 years, Forbes has estimated their total player-related costs at $182 million and $187 million. So $185 million-ish. Okay. So, I mean, you can do the math on there. If they're making somewhere around $330 or $340 million in revenue and their total baseball costs are $180-something million, and they have $425 million in debt on the books, I'd love to see the equation that comes out to that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. At least over the last 2 years. Now, they're going to argue that the COVID seasons really hurt them, and I'm certain that's the case. Sure. But over the last 2 seasons, and here's where Forbes tries to put a number on this, they have what they call, they're figuring out the operating income, which is basically you take the revenue, you minus the expenses. Sure. Like at the end of all this, what do they got that they're kind of working with after a season? Well, in 2023... they said it was $19 million. Okay. Now, I hesitate to call that like profit. It's not purely profit, but it's something resembling profit. Okay. And then last year it was $5 million. Okay. Both in the positive. And so again, unless these Forbes numbers are completely off, how are you substantially adding to debt over the last 2 seasons at least to get to $425 million? Unless all your debt was accrued prior to the last 2 seasons, or all your debt is not coming from baseball.
That is,
You've put debt on your books, which we talked a lot about on the Patreon side.
This is why we think they're motivated sellers.
Correct. And then here was the last thing, that in addition to these yearly figures, revenue, costs, operating income being positive and all that, Forbes also just lists what they estimated the franchise at each year. Okay. 1.5 now. Well, what was it last year? So over the last 2 years, where all these numbers have occurred, the valuation of just the franchise itself has risen by $110 million. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So again, I don't need to go on my billionaire rant again or my Polehead rant again, but you guys are starting to see what makes a person do these rants, which is when you start to look at a source that you at least have some trust in that is attempting to estimate this stuff. Sure. For a league that will not open their books, the math just ain't mathing in the way that would suggest the Twins are what they're putting forth, I guess. To me, at least. But I'm an idiot. So it's possible. Forbes presumably is not that as dumb as me.
All of that given all of that, they should have plenty of suitors, right? They should have plenty of suitors who are interested in buying.
Which they've said.
Which they seem to keep implying that they've got other people beyond the Ishbia.
The last thing on that. Yeah, so I'm going to guess Dan will have an update on the sales stuff. He he's been trying to put out an update of some kind, meaningful or not,
right?
Every couple of weeks or something like that. It's probably around that time. So I'll leave that to him. But I did. Like I said, I was really thinking a lot about this time next year. What is my level of optimism that things, not better or worse, but different, change? What, we've already seen Dave St. Peter step down. That's a huge change.
Yep.
But like, how optimistic am I that maybe not by the trade deadline, maybe not even by the beginning of the offseason? I mean, I don't want to put a timeline on it, but as I'm sitting in, seat 6 in the press box next year, looking out at the crowd, how optimistic am I that it will not be a Pohlad run organization? And maybe I'm naive, but maybe I'm hopeful more than naive.
Yeah.
But I'm still optimistic that will be.
Well, and I do think that's the sort of thing, like, I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make overall, but it'll definitely make a difference in sort of the vibe around this team right now. I don't know if it's going to make any difference in terms of the performance on the field, or how much the performance on the field is going to affect that vibe. Maybe it affects it even more than an ownership change. But having a fan base that actually believes in the leadership of this team would be a valuable thing especially after watching, them essentially kneecap it, coming off of a 2023 season that was showing real promise in terms of the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that Twins hitter is like grounding into a double play because in the back of their minds they know the Pohlads own the team.
Right.
But I mean, clear lines can be drawn, clear connections can be made from their choices following 2023 to cut $30 million in payroll, to handicap the front office, and then clear choices with the front office not making moves the last 2 off seasons and deadlines and all.
Feels like things have stagnated in a top-down direction.
And to your point, I completely agree. There is absolutely nothing guaranteeing that if there is a new billionaire at the helm, that it will be any better. And in fact, there's some chance it could be worse. It can always be worse.
That is Aaron's.
Yeah, that's my family crest.
Number one rule.
The Gleeman family crest is just a guy like Debbie Downer looking down at their shoes, and it just says things can always be worse. But I mean, that is true. Like I think we would like to think that whoever comes in will be better.
Sure,
but
bring some energy.
Right. And I do think that's more likely than not.
Yeah, of course.
But it's also possible someone comes in and runs it like a quote-unquote business and does the same thing. But what I can guarantee is a change will be a change.
Yes.
It will be different. And at least initially, that could be enough for a lot of people to dip their toes back in the water.
Start to believe again, yeah.
Or just
start investing themselves.
To care.
Right.
To not be like... Yeah. Trying to shield themselves emotionally from this thing that has been pissing them off. Yeah, right. And I think that, as I was like just sitting there kind of emoing out, that's really just what I want. Because you can't ask for, someone to come in and double the payroll and all. Yeah, everyone wants that.
Sure.
But I've learned to keep my expectations in check. There's the other family crest. I've learned to keep my expectations low. I just think that, and I'm not a change for change sake guy. You know that better than anybody.
No, I know that very well.
But I just think after 40 plus years of this, it's not just change for change sake. There's no mystery left in how the Pohlads will run things. We're on our 3rd generation who have essentially all ultimately gotten to a point where they're running it similarly. Right. There's been stretches where they show some deviation from that for a year or two.
Sure.
But ultimately, Joe Pohlad did the same thing that Jim Pohlad did the same thing that Carl Pohlad did, which is after a window of this or a window dressing of this, they cut payroll, below average spending, vibes are bad, everyone doesn't like the ownership. Right. After 40 plus years of that, I'll take door number 2, even if door number 2 has no guarantees behind it. And I remain optimistic, if only because I feel like being pessimistic on that front, in addition to watching how poorly the team has now played for like the last 50 games, is like too much to bear.
Well, towards that, as a reflection of that Pohlad philosophy here, I was talking with somebody at the Grey Duck Deck yesterday, and they pointed out, you remember all those years when the Twins were not very good, and the narrative around them was, now is not the time to spend money because they're not going to be good anyway. Right. Now is not the time to spend money.
Under Terry Ryan, usually.
Yeah. we don't need to spend money now because we're not going to be very good. And if we don't spend the money now, but when it's time to spend the money,
we'll put pedal to the metal.
Then we're going to put the pedal to the metal. Right. We're saving it up right now so we can put the pedal to the metal when it's really ready to go.
We saw that for one whole season, basically. And pedal to the metal was the 17th highest payroll. But even that made me I was satisfied with that. Yeah, I mean,
isn't that hilarious?
But I mean,
let's all remember that 5 years or maybe 2 years from now when we're like, they can't, they should spend right now. They're not going to be competitive anyway.
Right. Well, and what we used to joke back then, it was Jim Pohlad in the ownership chair back then and Terry Ryan in the GM chair back then. But that's a cycle too. It's like there's nothing that it's not tanking in Major League Baseball is not as valuable or effective as tanking in other sports because even top draft picks,
but it's more profitable,
right? And so that's what we would call BS on that as it was happening.
Yes,
because if you really wanted to follow through with that premise as an ownership group, what you would say publicly was, we've dropped to 25th in payroll when probably we should be somewhere closer to average. But we just didn't think this team was $30 million away from being competitive. Right. And there are times when that's just going to be true. But what was never said publicly or even hinted at publicly was, we'll get you on the back end here. We're going to put this money in, escrow somewhere or some investment. And 2 years from now, when the team starts to be on the rise again, not only will we get back to the average spending, but we'll have 4 years of this extra money that'd be $50 million. We can talk. We go sign whoever we want.
Yeah.
Well, no, that didn't ever happen.
That's never going to happen. Right.
And so, we knew that wasn't ever going to happen. But that is, by the way, one of the things that extremely rich people, especially in 2025, that is one of the clearest kind of benefit of the doubt that they receive, which is people assume, for whatever reason, that they're telling the truth and that they're effective at the things they claim to be effective at. Right. There hasn't been much evidence of that, with the Twins at least. And so, I agree with all that. It is very funny to have lived through sort of like 2 or 3 cycles of the same kind of, the team's bad now and we're not spending now, but just wait. And then you get to it and it's like, well, actually, we got to cut payroll even though they just won. And now you're back to, well, they might not be that good anymore, so maybe we'll trade away guys. And, and then it's just like, what's happened here? Like, what kind of shell game was going on here from a fan base?
We want to thank some people who did take care of you, kept this podcast free. We'll start with Factor, also Raycon earbuds, and No Frills Trivia. That's a new sponsor that you can check out. And also to our special thank you to our presenting sponsor, that's Black Stack Brewing. They're now being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota. Stop by your favorite liquor store or the Black Stack Tap Room, which I love, to grab your favorite brew or to try something new, Black Stack Brewing. We will be back on Monday morning with
recapping the Astro series, hopefully having some injury updates. And maybe talking about a win or two.
Yeah.
Will that be too much to ask, John?
I will be really interested to see now how the middle of this rotation, that is now a storyline.
Right.
In this rotation between Ryan's decreased velocity, Bailey Ober's decreased velocity and ineffectiveness last time around, Paddock just blowing up.
Yeah.
I will be very interested. Like, is this rotation is this rotation going to be what we thought they were going to be, or are we going to have to look for changes to be made in April? I think we're going to find a lot of that. We're going to have a whole lot more evidence before we talk to you on the free episode again next Friday, folks.
Yes, and if you want more shows, Monday and probably Wednesday too, I think we'll do a mailbag or. It depends. If news happens,
and we might be doing some bonus content again. Like you want to get a full breakdown of all the foods at Target Field. Go out.
You know what I should do for bonus content? Just leave a recorder running and let people hear what Dan does during just the things he says.
I was thinking, or the 10 minutes that we do before we actually turn on the microphone.
Well, yeah, I don't want to get canceled. So yeah, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. We are no longer charging per episode. It is now $8 a month. You get everything included, the whole back catalog, at least 2 episodes on average per week, commercial free, plus all the bonus stuff that we can think about.
Aaron's phone number.
Well, that's fine. I don't answer the phone. I mean, that has no effect on me whatsoever. You know that.
I know better than anybody.
Hopefully we'll see you guys Monday morning.
Bye-bye.
Gleeman